two black twin girls found the cop dying. What the girls and their dog did shocked the entire police force. What happened that December night shook an entire police force to its core. What these twin 9-year-old girls did in the face of unimaginable pain and community hatred redefined everything the community thought they knew about courage, forgiveness, and what it truly meant to serve and protect. That night, a ghastly accident occurred that made a police cruiser wrap around a telephone pole like a crumpled piece of paper, steam rising from the destroyed engine into the cold night air. Inside the wreckage, Officer Liam Winslow, a white cop with 18 years on the force, was trapped and bleeding out, his life slipping away with every passing second. His radio was smashed, his backup was miles away. And the community that surrounded him? They were walking away. He got what he deserved, someone shouted from the growing crowd of onlookers. Phone cameras were recording, but not to help, to document what they saw as justice finally being served. You see, this wasn't just any cop lying there dying. He was one of the officers who had been on scene 6 months earlier when Janet Markethi, a beloved member of this very community, was shot and killed by another police officer who was his partner during what should have been a routine traffic stop. The neighborhood had not forgotten. The neighborhood had not forgiven. And as Officer Winslow's blood pooled beneath his head, creating a dark stain on the asphalt, it seemed like the neighborhood was finally getting its revenge. But then something happened that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. Two small figures broke away from the crowd of adults walking in the opposite direction. Two 9-year-old black girls, no taller than the car's door handles, started running toward that wreckage. Their German Shepherd mix was right behind them, barking frantically as if he sensed something the adults had missed. Those two little girls, they were Amara and Aaliyah Markethi. And the woman who had been killed 6 months earlier by Winslow's partner wasn't just another community member to them. Janet Markethi had been their mother. Before we continue this story, if you love heartwarming stories like this, hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. To understand what happened that December night, you need to know who these little girls really were and the incredible burden they had been carrying on their tiny shoulders. Amara and Aaliyah Markethi were identical twins, just 9 years old, but they had already lived through more heartbreak than most adults experienced in a lifetime. 6 months earlier, their world had been torn apart when their mother, Janet Markethi, was shot and killed during a traffic stop that went horribly wrong. In an instant, these babies went from having a loving mother who tucked them in every night to being orphans, left to navigate a world that suddenly felt cold and dangerous. They were living with their 17-year-old brother Alex, who was trying his absolute best to fill a role he never should have had to take on. Alex was working double shifts at a warehouse, his hands raw from manual labor, his eyes hollow from grief and exhaustion. He was just a kid himself. But he had become both mother and father overnight, consumed by a rage so deep it was eating him alive from the inside out. The twins attended grief counseling twice a week at the community center, sitting in those small plastic chairs, trying to make sense of why their mama wasn't coming home. They carried a photo of Janet Markethi everywhere they went, tucked safely in Amara's backpack, creased from being held so many times by little fingers that missed their mother's touch. In that photo, Janet was smiling, her arms wrapped around both girls, her eyes full of the love and dreams she had had for their futures. Their constant companion was Justice, a German Shepherd mix that Janet had rescued and named with such intention. Justice wasn't just a pet, he was their emotional support animal, their protector, and honestly, some days he felt like the only stable thing left in their shattered world. That dog seemed to understand their pain in a way that even the grief counselors couldn't, staying close when the nightmares came, sensing when the tears were about to fall. But here's what made this story even more complicated, even more heartbreaking. The man trapped in that mangled police car wasn't just any officer. Officer Liam Winslow was 42 years old, an 18-year veteran of the force who was drowning in his own sea of trauma and poor choices. He had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, came home with PTSD that he had never properly addressed, and watched his marriage fall apart as he tried to numb his pain with alcohol. Just a year before that December night, Winslow's own partner had been killed in the line of duty, leaving him with survivor's guilt that was crushing his soul. He had been drinking heavily, making terrible decisions, and earning complaint after complaint from community members who were tired of dealing with cops who seemed more interested in power trips than protecting and serving. Officer Liam Winslow had been the second officer on scene the night Janet McCarthy was killed. He wasn't the shooter, that was his partner, but he had been there during the investigation that ultimately cleared his partner of any wrongdoing. He had stood by and watched as another family was destroyed, as another black mother became a hashtag, as another community lost faith in the system that was supposed to protect them. So, when December 3rd rolled around, at exactly 8:45 p.m., and the twins were taking their nightly walk with Justice through their East Oakland neighborhood, the universe was about to test everything they thought they knew about right and wrong, about justice and mercy, about what their mother would have wanted them to become. Winslow had been drinking that evening. His appeal for PTSD disability benefits had been denied earlier that day, and the weight of his failures, his trauma, and his guilt had become too much to bear. His patrol car swerved off the road at high speed, striking a telephone pole with such force that the sound echoed through the entire neighborhood like a gunshot. Within minutes, neighbors started emerging from their homes, drawn by the crash and the sight of that crumpled police car. But when someone in the crowd recognized the license plate number and shouted, "That's one of the cops from the McCarthy shooting," the mood shifted from concern to something much darker. Phone cameras came out, not to call for help, but to record what many saw as karma finally catching up. "Let him rot," someone yelled from the back of the growing crowd. "He wouldn't help us when we needed it." The cheering and hostile comments grew louder as more people realized who was trapped inside that car. And that was when Amara and Aaliyah's world stopped spinning. They recognized his face immediately from the police report photos they had seen during the investigation into their mother's death. The photos that Alex had shown them, trying to prepare them for what the legal process would look like. The face that had appeared in their nightmares, not as the shooter, but as one of the men who had been there when everything fell apart. Aaliyah started crying first, her small voice barely audible above the crowd's hostility. "That's him, Amara. That's one of them." The weight of recognition hit both girls like a physical blow, and they stood frozen, watching the man who represented so much of their pain bleeding out just yards away from them. That was when their brother Alex came running up, having heard the crash from their apartment 3 blocks away. But when he saw Officer Winslow's face through the shattered windshield, his expression hardened into something that looked nothing like the gentle big brother who read them bedtime stories. This was pure rage, the kind that had been building up for 6 months with nowhere to go. "Come on, girls," Alex said, his voice cold as winter. "We're going home." He made his choice. Now he can live with it. He reached for their hands, ready to pull them away from the scene, away from the man who represented everything wrong with the system that had failed their family. But the twins didn't move, because even through their own horror and recognition, they could see something the angry crowd couldn't see. Officer Winslow was unconscious, blood pooling under his head, creating a dark stain that was spreading across the asphalt. His radio was completely destroyed in the crash. And Justice, their faithful companion, was whimpering and pawing at both girls, sensing their distress but also sensing something else, the scent of someone who was dying. And there, visible through the spider-webbed windshield, was something that would change everything. A family photo on Winslow's dashboard. A photo of him with a little mixed-race girl who couldn't have been much older than they were, her smile bright and trusting, as she hugged the man who was now fighting for his life just feet away from them. The photo had writing on the back that they could just barely make out through the cracks in the glass. "Daddy, come home safe. Love, Maya." As the crowd continued their jeering and hostile chanting, something caught Aaliyah's eye that made her blood run cold. While everyone else was focused on their anger and their phones, she noticed something glinting on Officer Winslow's wrist, a medical alert bracelet. And suddenly, her mother's voice echoed in her memory. You see, Janet Markathi hadn't just been a loving mother, she had been a certified nursing assistant at Oakland General Hospital. She had brought her medical knowledge home, teaching her daughters basic first aid, how to recognize emergencies, and most importantly, how to spot the signs of diabetic shock. And as Aaliyah looked closer at Winslow's unconscious form, she saw all the telltale signs her mother had taught her to watch for. Amara, look, Aaliyah whispered urgently, grabbing her sister's arm. He's not just hurt from the crash, he's dying. She pointed to Winslow's pale, clammy skin, his rapid, shallow breathing, the way his body was trembling even though he was unconscious. Mama taught us about this, remember? His blood sugar. It's crashing. The crash didn't just hurt him, it triggered something worse. That was when Amara got a clearer look at that dashboard photo, and what she saw there would haunt her for the rest of her life. Officer Liam Winslow was hugging a beautiful, mixed-race little girl who couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. She had pigtails just like theirs, a gap-toothed smile that reminded them of their own school pictures, and eyes full of innocent love for her daddy. But it was the writing on the back of that photo, visible now through the spider-webbed cracks in the windshield, that hit like a punch to the gut. Daddy, come home safe. Love, Maya. Here was a little girl, probably sitting at home right then, waiting for her daddy to come through the door. A little girl who had no idea that her father was lying unconscious in a mangled car, his life slipping away while a crowd of people celebrated his potential death. A little girl who might wake up the next day to the worst news a child could ever hear. When the twins tried to explain the medical emergency to their brother Alex, something inside him finally snapped. All the rage, all the grief, all the sleepless nights spent wondering why their mother had to die came pouring out in a voice so full of pain that it actually silenced the hostile crowd. So what? Alex exploded, his 17-year-old voice cracking with emotions too big for his young heart to hold. So what if he's dying? Where was his mercy when Mama was bleeding out on that street? Where was his daughter's sympathy when we were crying at Mama's funeral? Where was his medical emergency bracelet when Mama needed someone to fight for her life? The raw anguish in Alex's voice cut through the night air like a blade. This wasn't just anger talking. This was a teenage boy who had had his childhood ripped away, who had been forced to become a parent when he should have been worried about homework and video games, who had watched his baby sisters cry themselves to sleep every night for 6 months. The crowd fell silent. Even the most hostile neighbors seemed to feel the weight of this young man's pain, the impossible burden he had been carrying while trying to hold his family together. But in that moment of silence, Aaliyah's small voice carried a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 9 years. She whispered to her sister, tears streaming down her face. Mama always said, hate is a poison we drink hoping someone else gets sick. Amara nodded through her own tears, her voice barely audible but filled with the kind of moral clarity that only children seem to possess. She'd want us to be better than them. Not for him, for us. You see, Janet Markathi had raised her daughters with a philosophy that transcended the pain and injustice they had witnessed. Even in their grief, even faced with one of the men who had been there the night their world ended, they could hear their mother's voice teaching them that becoming better people wasn't about rewarding those who had wronged them. It was about honoring the values their mother had died believing in. And that was when justice made the decision for all of them. The German Shepherd mix broke free from Aaliyah's grip and ran straight to the crashed patrol car, barking frantically in a way they had never heard before. But he wasn't just barking, he was doing something that made everyone in that crowd stop and stare in absolute shock. Justice started performing CPR chest compressions on Officer Winslow's unconscious body. This wasn't some random dog behavior. This was a skill that Janet Markathi had specifically trained Justice to perform before she died. In her work as a nursing assistant, she had seen too many emergencies where every second counted. where the difference between life and death was whether someone knew how to keep blood pumping until help arrived. So she had trained their family dog to recognize cardiac distress and respond with life-saving chest compressions. What happened next forever changed how you thought about courage, because these two 9-year-old girls made a decision that stunned everyone watching. Against Alex's desperate protests and the crowd's growing anger, both Amara and Aaliyah crawled through the shattered passenger window of that mangled patrol car. Glass crunched under their small knees as they squeezed into the wreckage, with Justice right behind them. Still performing those life-saving chest compressions their mother had taught him. Aaliyah immediately pulled out her small flip phone, the emergency phone Alex had given them after their mother's death, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Please," she whispered into the phone, "there's been a bad car accident on Maple Street. A police officer is hurt really bad and he's diabetic and he's not waking up and there's so much blood." Meanwhile, Amara did something that would break your heart if you could see it. She took off her Disney princess jacket, the same pink jacket with Elsa and Anna that she had worn to their mother's funeral 6 months earlier. The jacket she had refused to let Alex wash because it still smelled like their mama's perfume. And she pressed it against Officer Winslow's bleeding head wound, applying pressure just like she had learned in the first aid classes their mother had insisted they take. That jacket, soaked now with the blood of one of the men who had been there the night their world ended, represented everything pure about these children's hearts. They weren't thinking about revenge or justice, or whether this man deserved to live or die. They were thinking about a little girl named Maya, who needed her daddy to come home safe. The crowd watching this unfold began to fracture right down the middle. Some neighbors, moved by the incredible courage of these babies, started pushing forward to help. They began directing traffic, clearing space for the ambulance, shouting for people to bring towels and water. But others remained hostile, arguing with their own family members about whether Officer Winslow deserved to live or die after what his partner had done to Janet Marcathy. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived next door to the Marcathy family, started crying as she watched those little girls risk their lives. "Lord," she said through her tears, her voice carrying over the chaos, "these babies are teaching us how to be human again." And that was when something broke inside Alex. Watching his baby sisters, the two people he had sworn to protect above all else, crawling into a dangerous, unstable wreck to save the life of someone connected to their mother's death, it shattered every wall of rage he had built around his heart. This 17-year-old boy, who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, suddenly realized that his sisters were teaching him something about forgiveness that he had forgotten in his grief. Alex pushed through the crowd and joined the rescue effort. Using the heavy lifting techniques he had learned working double shifts at the warehouse, he carefully helped extract Officer Winslow from the twisted metal, his strong young arms supporting the unconscious man's weight, while he whispered, his voice raw with emotion, "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for them. Because they're better people than any of us deserve." But then came the moment that would haunt everyone who witnessed it forever. Officer Winslow flatlined, right there in the street, with two 9-year-old girls covered in his blood. His heart stopped beating. The man who had been there the night their mother died was now dying himself. And suddenly, the weight of a life hung in the balance of what these children would choose to do next. Without hesitation, Amara started performing the child CPR she had learned in school, her small hands positioned on Winslow's chest, tears streaming down her face as she counted out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her voice cracked with the pain of her own loss as she pleaded, "Please don't die. Your little girl needs you to come home. Maya needs her daddy." The irony was devastating. Here was a child who would never see her own mother again, fighting with everything she had to make sure another child wouldn't lose her father. Here was a little girl whose mama had been taken by police violence, literally breathing life back into a police officer because she understood something about love that the adults around her had forgotten. "Please," Amara sobbed between compressions, "Maya's waiting for you. She wrote on your picture that she wants you to come home safe. Please don't make her feel like we feel. Please don't let her hurt like we hurt." Aaliyah joined her sister, helping with the compressions while whispering prayers she had learned in the grief counseling sessions. "God, if you're listening, please don't let another little girl lose her daddy. Please let Maya keep her family." And then, just as the paramedics arrived with their sirens wailing and their emergency lights cutting through the darkness, Officer Liam Winslow's eyes fluttered open. His first words, looking up at those two small faces covered in his blood, their hands still pressed against his chest, their eyes full of tears and determination, were barely a whisper. "Angels, I see angels." But Aaliyah, wise beyond her years, leaned down close to his ear and whispered back the truth that would change everything. "We're not angels, Officer Winslow. We're just little girls who miss our mama." If you believe in love covering all deeds, hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts on if the girls did well to help the cop in the comment section. The paramedics took over then, working frantically to stabilize Winslow before rushing him to Oakland General Hospital, the same hospital where their mother Janet had worked, where she had learned the medical skills she had passed on to her daughters, skills that had just saved the life of a man connected to her death. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, Alex gathered his sisters in his arms, all three of them crying together in the middle of that street, surrounded by neighbors who were seeing them, really seeing them, for the first time since their mother died. These weren't just the Markethi kids, the ones people whispered about at the grocery store. These were extraordinary human beings who had chosen love over hate, mercy over revenge, hope over despair, even when it would have been easier, more justified, more understandable to walk away. 3 days later, Officer Liam Winslow was lying in a hospital bed at Oakland General, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with emotions he had buried for months. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. Between the crash injuries and the diabetic shock, he should have died that night. But he knew it wasn't luck that saved him. It was 2 9-year-old girls who had every reason in the world to let him die. When he asked to meet with the twins and Alex, the hospital staff wasn't sure it was a good idea. But Winslow insisted, and something in his voice convinced them that this was about more than just saying thank you. When Amara, Aaliyah, and Alex walked into that hospital room, Officer Winslow took one look at those little girls, still wearing band-aids on their knees from crawling through broken glass to save his life, and he completely broke down. This was a man who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, who had seen combat, who had buried his own partner just a year earlier. But sitting there looking at the children whose mother's death he had been complicit in covering up, he cried like he hadn't cried since he was their age. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, his words barely understandable through his tears. "I'm so sorry about your mama. I should have fought harder. I should have spoken up. I should have been brave like you were that night. But I was a coward, and because of my cowardice, you lost the most important person in your world." But what came next shocked everyone in that room. Officer Winslow revealed something that would change everything. He had been living with crushing guilt for 6 months because he had wanted to speak up about his partner's excessive use of force that night, but the department had silenced him. He had seen the body camera footage that showed his partner escalating the situation unnecessarily. He had witnessed the cover-up. He had known that Janet Markethi didn't have to die. With shaking hands, he reached into his bedside table and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was his written statement detailing everything he had witnessed that night, along with copies of body camera footage that had been officially lost during the investigation. "This should have been turned in 6 months ago," he told Alex, his voice breaking. "Your mama deserved better. You all deserve better. I was too much of a coward to do what was right then, but those little girls taught me what courage actually looked like." Within 2 weeks, Janet Markethi's case was officially reopened. With Winslow's testimony and the recovered body camera footage, there was finally enough evidence to charge his former partner with excessive use of force and involuntary manslaughter. The department's cover-up was exposed, leading to the resignation of 3 supervisors and a complete overhaul of their internal investigation procedures. Officer Winslow faced consequences too. He was suspended without pay and faced charges for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. But instead of fighting it, he cooperated fully with investigators and used his time off to get sober and enter intensive therapy for his PTSD. But here was where this story became truly extraordinary. The twins and Alex decided to turn their pain into purpose. They started the Janet Marcathy Foundation with a mission to provide therapy dogs like Justice to families affected by police violence. The foundation would help other children process their trauma while working toward meaningful police reform. And Officer Liam Winslow, he became their first major donor and their most unlikely advocate. 6 months after that December night, something miraculous had happened. Winslow, now sober and actively working through his trauma and therapy, had become a regular volunteer with the Janet Marcathy Foundation. He and Alex had developed an unlikely friendship built on shared pain, mutual respect, and the wisdom of two little girls who refused to let hate win. Winslow used his insider knowledge of police procedures to help the foundation advocate for better training, accountability measures, and community oversight. He spoke at town halls, testified before city council, and worked tirelessly to make sure that no other family would go through what the Marcathy children had endured. The final scene of this incredible story took place at Greenwood Cemetery, where Janet Marcathy was laid to rest. It was a Saturday morning, 6 months after the crash, and the twins were placing fresh flowers on their mother's grave, while Justice sat quietly beside them, still their faithful protector and companion. As they were arranging the flowers, daisies, because those were their mama's favorite, they heard footsteps behind them. It was Officer Winslow, approaching respectfully, carrying something in his hands. Without saying a word, he knelt down next to their mother's headstone and placed his police badge next to their flowers. Not dramatically, not for show, but as a quiet symbol of the transformation that had taken place in all their hearts. "Your mama raised two of the strongest people I've ever met," he told them, his voice filled with genuine admiration and love. "She'd be so proud of who you're becoming." Aaliyah, now 10 years old but still carrying wisdom far beyond her years, looked up at this man who had been part of their worst nightmare, but had become part of their healing journey. And she said something that perfectly captured the lesson of this entire story. "She taught us that love is stronger than hate, Officer Winslow, even when it's really, really hard." As they stood there together, a former cop seeking redemption, a teenage boy learning to forgive, two little girls choosing love over vengeance, and a therapy dog who had helped save them all, you realize that this was what healing looked like. This was what justice actually meant. This was what happened when children taught adults how to be human again. And here was the final question. After watching Amara and Aaliyah's incredible journey from tragedy to healing, what was one act of forgiveness or courage that you could choose that day that might change someone else's life forever? Let me know in the comments below, because sometimes the smallest acts of love created the biggest miracles. The twins were right. Love really was stronger than hate, even when it was really, really hard. If this story moved you, if it showed you something about the power of forgiveness and the courage of children, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to remember that love really could triumph over hate, even in the darkest circumstances.